I gave better advice to strangers than I gave to myself. That's the sentence that unlocked something. About 3 years after the fact, when I finally sat down with a therapist and started trying to understand a chapter of my life that I had been storing in a sealed compartment, somewhere in the back of everything, under a label that said "not yet." I was good at listening to other people. Friends in bad situations would call me, and I would hear them out fully, and then I would ask questions that helped them clarify what they already knew, and then I would say, "You already have the answer. You just haven't let yourself say it yet." And then I would hang up the phone and go back to a situation in my own life that I had been actively, methodically refusing to listen to for 18 months. The situation was a business partnership. I'd started a small communications firm with 2 people I trusted, or thought I trusted. We'd been friends for years before we went into business, which is both the best and worst context for a business partnership. Best because you have history, and trust, and a shared language. Worst because the friendship creates social costs for every professional friction, and those costs make it very hard to address problems directly before they accumulate into something irrecoverable. The problem started small. One of my partners, I'll call her Vivian, had a different working style from mine. She processed decisions slowly and needed extensive consensus before moving. I processed quickly and preferred to move and adjust. Neither of these is wrong. In a well-designed partnership, they're complementary. In ours, without explicit agreement about how to navigate the difference, they became a source of constant, low-level friction. I noticed it from the early months. I felt it every time I wanted to move on something and we stalled out in discussion. I felt it every time I made a decision without full consensus and came back to find a cold silence where there should have been collegial energy. I felt it specifically and repeatedly, and I filed it under "we need to talk about this at some point," and then I didn't talk about it. Why didn't I talk about it? I have asked myself that question many times. Part of it was the friendship cost I mentioned, the calculation that naming the problem might damage the relationship. Part of it was optimism, genuine if naive, the belief that we'd find our rhythm as we built more experience together. And part of it was something more uncomfortable than either of those. I didn't fully trust my own read of the situation. I had a persistent, nagging voice that said things were off, and I was dismissing that voice because addressing what it was pointing at seemed costly and complicated. I was dismissing myself. That's the precise thing. I was doing, with my own interior signals, exactly what people do when they live with someone who tells them their perceptions aren't reliable. By year 1, the friction had developed into something more structural. Vivian and I had fundamentally different views on what the company should become, views we had never explicitly articulated and compared. She wanted something small and boutique and values-focused. I wanted to grow. Neither of us had named this to the other, and so we were each making decisions consistent with our separate visions and then being confused and frustrated when those decisions conflicted. The third partner, Marla, was caught in the middle in a way that was quietly destroying her. She'd come to the partnership from a place of genuine excitement about working with 2 people she admired. She was spending most of her energy absorbing tension between us. I knew this. I could see it on Marla's face in meetings. I could feel the weight in the room when the 3 of us were together. I had all of the information necessary to understand that the partnership was in serious trouble, and I was using that information to worry rather than to act. That's another failure mode, having accurate information and converting it into anxiety rather than into decisive response. The anxiety is real, it's a response to information, but it's not the same as doing something. It gives you the feeling of being engaged with a problem while actually doing nothing to address it. I was very anxious for about 6 months. I was also not saying anything. The partnership dissolved at month 22. Not cleanly, there is no clean dissolution when friendship and business are braided together. Vivian said things I found unfair. I said things I regret. Marla, who had been holding the space between us with increasing exhaustion, left first, and I can't blame her. The legal process was tedious and expensive and took 8 months. The friendship with Vivian took 3 years to rebuild into something different, not what it was, but something. We don't talk about the business. We've agreed, implicitly and wisely, that some things are better left unexamined now that they're past. What I took from it, what I had to take from it, because something had to justify the cost, is a completely different relationship with my own interior signals. I now operate by a principle that sounds simple but requires constant practice. If something is bothering me consistently over 3 or more weeks, I name it. Out loud. To the person it involves. Not as an accusation, not as a crisis, not as an ultimatum. Just as information I'm holding that I think is worth sharing. It requires being willing to have a slightly uncomfortable conversation. It requires giving up the fantasy that if you wait long enough, the thing will resolve on its own. It requires trusting that your read of a situation is at least worth examining, even if it turns out to be partially wrong. I spent 18 months not giving myself those things. I was sitting on accurate, specific, actionable information about a situation that was deteriorating, and I was filing it under not yet, because not yet felt safer than the conversation. Not yet almost never is. And the voice that's been trying to tell you something for months, the one you keep dismissing because it's inconvenient or uncomfortable or you're not quite sure enough to act on it. That voice is the most honest thing about you. I know. I should have listened to mine. There is something I want to add that I think is essential to the story, not as a coda, but as the part that actually contains the lesson. Understanding what happened is only half of it. The other half is what you do with the understanding. And for a long time, I confused having insight with having changed. They are not the same thing. You can understand a pattern completely and still enact it perfectly, because patterns live below the level of understanding, in the body and the habit and the reflex. Real change requires not just seeing the pattern but building a different response, not once, but repeatedly, until the new response starts to feel as natural as the old one did. That process is slow. It's humbling. There are weeks where I can track the insight and weeks where I slip back into the old behavior before I've noticed it happening. And the slipping back, I've learned, is not evidence of failure. It's evidence of learning. You can only see the pattern when you're outside it. When you're inside it, you're in it, and the work is to build enough awareness that the outside perspective arrives faster. What helped me most was specificity. Not I want to do better, but the concrete, exact question, what will I do differently in this specific type of situation, the next time it appears? What is the exact moment where the old behavior begins? And what is the alternative action I can take at that exact moment? Those questions, practiced, tested, refined, are what actual change is made of. Not resolution. Not insight alone. Specific, practiced, repeated alternative actions. I'm not done. I'm not fixed. I don't think that's how this works. But I'm different than I was. In specific, measurable, real ways. And the story I've just told you is part of why. The telling matters. It keeps it from becoming something I store away and don't examine. It makes it real, again, every time I say it. And real is where the change lives. I think often about the version of myself that was inside the experience, not this one, the one that can look back and see it clearly, but the one who was in the middle of it, navigating with partial information and real fear and the limited emotional resources of someone who hadn't yet learned what was happening. That version of me was doing the best she could with what she had. That's not a get-out-of-accountability-free card. But it is a necessary part of the honest accounting, because self-understanding can't be built on self-punishment alone. At some point the punishment has to give way to comprehension. And comprehension, real comprehension, requires some compassion for the person you were before you knew what you know now. I didn't have the tools I have now. I built them since. slowly, imperfectly, with help from therapists and honest conversations and the specific, uncomfortable practice of sitting with things I'd rather not sit with. The goal is not to arrive at a version of myself that doesn't make mistakes. That version doesn't exist. The goal is to make a different kind of mistake each time. Not the same one, wearing a new costume. A genuinely new one, smaller, or at least different in its shape, because I'm bringing more awareness to the territory than I had the last time. Progress doesn't feel the way we imagine it will when we're inside the difficult chapter. It doesn't feel like transformation. It feels like the gap between impulse and action getting slightly longer. Like the moment of recognition arriving slightly earlier. Like the voice that says, "Wait, not yet, is this what you actually want to do here?" Getting just a little louder, a little more reliable, a little more present when you need it most. That voice is there. It's always been there. I just had to learn to stay quiet long enough to hear it. And that's the practice, in the end. Staying quiet enough to hear yourself. In all the noise of living, in all the urgency and the wanting and the fear and the pressure, staying quiet enough to hear what you actually know. I'm still learning. But I'm listening now.